Hello, welcome back to a new series of Gardeners World. Well, we've all shared a fairly long and wet winter, but spring's here. And everything is growing and flowering here at Longmeadow and getting better day by day. Nigel's here too. Come on, Nigel, come and say hello. And I've got another little helper who I'll introduce to you later on. Come on, let's go. Last summer, we visited the Salutation Garden in Kent to see how they recovered from a disastrously wet winter.
We lost about 15,000 plants and bulbs. Years of hard work just disappeared.
And Joe has been looking at garden trees, and in the first of 3 films, he discovers how to select the right one for your garden.
In a way, they've got to work really, really hard to earn their space.
If you can get flower, fruit, autumn colour, perhaps even bark, you'd be doing well, wouldn't you?
And Carol has been to visit a garden halfway up a mountain in Wales filled with spring flowers.
I just think your garden is so magical, it's like an enchanted wood.
We wanted to go for a painterly effect, especially in the spring or early spring when there isn't much colour around, and it really brightens things up.
The snowdrops in the spring garden are coming to an end. They were actually at their best about a week ago. Funnily enough, they weren't really unseasonable this year. A lot of stuff was early, but the snowdrops flowered at the end of January and into February as normal. But whatever point they're at, now is the perfect moment to divide and spread them. Snowdrops spread by seed very well, but slowly. So the best way to do it is to lift them and divide them, either when they're flowering or just afterwards. And for example, this clump here is perfect. So just dig up a clump. Be ruthless. I know it's hard because it takes a while to get them to establish, and you feel you're destroying a precious display, but a clump like that is perfect. It's got a good root system, leave some soil on, not least because it stops it drying out, and get ready to move it. I'm going to take this clump too. Actually, if I take this apart here, gently open it out, put that in there, you can see that the individual plants are all in there, and you could plant out a little group like that. If you do this regularly, in about 3 or 4 years, you really start to bulk out, and that's when you get the magnificent display of sheets of snowdrops. All the snowdrops in the spring garden came from a little clump, not much bigger than that, 25 years ago, and they gradually spread, partly by me dividing them and partly by seed. But I want to take these to establish a new colony in the writing garden. Here at Longmeadow, it has been incredibly wet, but it's also been warm, and apparently we've all had the warmest winter since records began, which was 1659. So that's bound to affect our gardens. For example, this area was underwater for weeks on end, and the new rhubarb bed loved it. We've been picking rhubarb since the end of November. The wet weather has hindered the normal winter work, hasn't stopped it altogether. These beds, there are 8 of them, have been replanted with alliums rather than tulips, and flowers are coming at all times, which are completely perplexing. For example, wallflowers normally flower April, starting to flower now at the end of February. And the beds that we have here for 10 years have been filled with salad crops, and we pick them in autumn, and by Christmas normally they've done their thing. The weather has ravaged them. Not a bit of it this year. Chicory's still going strong. We've got lettuce without any protection, and it has broken all the rules for normal winter weather. The biggest surprise this winter have been daffodils. Now, I know this has been common right across the country. For example, the daffodils here in the Long Walk are coming to an end. They were at their best at the end of January. I've known nothing like that in my life, and I guess this is something we're just going to have to get used to, this kind of irregularity. The jewel garden has had a quiet winter, but then it always does. It's been very easy. Things like the phormiums have needed no protection, and there have been a bit of irregular growth. For example, the clematis are just romping away. This one here, for example, is looking with the same sort of growth that you would normally get in April. They still need pruning, and I'll show you how to do that later. And this euphorbia, this is Euphorbia wolfenii, has had these inflorescent signs for about a month now. Now, how long they'll last, I don't know. They're lovely, but they're slightly at the wrong time. The whole thing is all a little bit mixed up and out of kilter. However, Carol has been to see a garden in Carmarthenshire in Wales that always has to deal with quite tricky weather conditions. And this year, despite the winter we've had, is looking fantastic.
Winter. Moody. Atmospheric. A colourless palette that can be wild, beautiful, but dark. And it's after these dreary days, you walk out one morning into the garden and realise that suddenly the whole place is alive with jewels, all this sparkling, scintillating colour. Julian and Fiona Wormold have created a beautiful garden full of early spring colour on an exposed hillside. I just think your garden is so magical, it's like an enchanted wood.
Oh, thank you.
And I just love the way you use your plants.
We tried to get in lots of flowers, particularly insect-friendly flowers. So we started off just trying a few crocus here.
Yeah.
And I planted the cream beauty, and they did very well. So we thought we'd introduce some other colours.
Right.
We wanted to go for a painterly effect and sort of impressionistic, especially in the spring or early spring when there isn't much colour around. Certainly in the landscape, it really brightens things up. We're 800 feet up. It's pretty chilly. It's extreme.
And very high rainfall.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the best displays of cyclamen I've ever seen.
Well, thank you.
Those are all coombe at the top,
Yeah,
aren't they?
yeah.
Which you think of growing in rocky places,
Yeah.
you know, in the sunshine.
Yeah. But of course, it is quite rocky underneath here. It's shale,
Oh, is it?
yeah, and not very deep topsoil. There's a little bit of leaf litter.
Right.
And we started off with them along the top of the bank, but the seeds are spread by things like ants, and then we move the little seedlings around as well. They're quite easy to find. They're just tiny little round leaves. We just put them anywhere we think they might look good.
Yeah.
For certain parts of the garden we can't, but not to plant them too deeply. They've got to be put in near the surface. That's quite important.
Yeah. For the greatest part, these plants are bulbs, corms, tubers. They've been growing invisibly under the surface of the soil for months, and it's only when the temperatures rise that they begin to pop up their heads and make their show. Lots of blues, whites, purples, lavenders, yellows, all the colours that bees love. The great majority of these plants are short of stature. You need to be if you're not going to get blown this way and that. And most have tiny flowers. Big, blousy petals would be a mistake. They'd just get thrashed to bits. The only exception to this is hellebores. They have big flowers, but those flowers are not composed of petals. They're sepals, and they're tough, and they can withstand these gale force winds. Yeah, hellebores look so pleased with themselves, don't they?
Oh, they do.
But there's no foliage. You've taken all the leaves off.
We start taking the leaves off back in August when the first cyclamen heterofolia flowers appear in other parts of the garden,
Yeah.
and gradually remove it until late September, early October when we take all the foliage off.
So is it solely to make sure that there's enough light for the bulbs that are coming
Yes,
through?
I just tied it. I mean, I actually prefer to see the flowers without the leaves. You see them more clearly.
Everything looks completely natural.
That's what we've aimed for. We've always wanted a garden that sat well in the landscape and complemented the house.
What must be so wonderful is waking up every morning, coming out here and spotting more and more of these beautiful little plants.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and it changes every day, maybe even twice a day this time of the year.
Thanks so much for sharing it with us. It's a true inspiration.
Well, thank you very much for coming.
It's been a real pleasure,
having you.
yes.
Although, of course, I agree that seeing the garden change day by day is one of the thrills of this time of year. There is still a bit of planning to be done. And what I'm planning here in the writing garden is to have a swathe of snowdrops running along either side of the path. Now, that will take a few years to come good, but if I start now, it will happen. That can even be broken down again, I think. So small clumps about that size, and then just plant them in the ground so that they're replanted the same depth that they were dug up. The thing to remember with snowdrops is they're one of the few bulbs that like moisture. And after you've planted them, the one thing that you may have to do is water them. Don't let them dry out until the foliage has died right back. Now, if you don't have snowdrops to divide, of course, you can buy them. Now, there's 100 in here. This cost about £8. So if you buy a couple of hundred for under £20, you can really set the garden up with a display of snowdrops that will multiply and give you stock from which you can then divide for future years. Now, 9 years ago, I had the honour of opening a garden in Kent called the Salutation. It wasn't a new garden. It was designed by the great architect Edwin Lutyens in the Edwardian era. But it had fallen into disarray and disrepair and had been restored and opened to the public. It was fantastic then, and it has got much better since. It's grown and prospered, and thousands of people have visited it. But it's also had to face and cope with disaster.
The garden is a very special place for me because of the Lutyens house at the heart of it, but also because the garden has very strong lines, being designed by an architect. But within that, it's become my plant playground. I became head gardener of the Salutation in 2005. When I arrived, the garden was virtually derelict. Most of the planting was missing from the garden by that point. It had been neglected for about 30 years. And for a town garden, it's a little over 3.5 acres, so it's quite a substantial size. And really, you had to look through the mess and the chaos that was the garden. Edwin Lutyens, as an architect here at the Salutation, his work is evident because of his huge oversized chimney stacks that he created way out of scale with the rest of the building. The house is very symmetrical, very typical of his work, but also it's the way that the house is nestled into the symmetrical design of the garden. We decided that when we were going to restore the garden, we would, as much as possible, faithfully recreate Lutyens' original garden plan. But in terms of the planting within it, we felt that it wasn't appropriate to try and recreate the planting exactly as it was. Instead, the garden would be alive and not encapsulated in history. The restoration proper had finished, and we were settling into gardening life. And in 2013, December the 6th, there was a huge tidal surge that came down the English Channel and up the river next to us here, the River Stour, and flooded the gardens. At its deepest point, we were about 5 feet underwater. Because the garden is lower lying than the river, it trapped about 5 million litres of mixed fresh and salt water in the garden that we had to set about as quickly as we could, removing with pumps. The impact of the garden was devastating, really, and we lost about 15,000 plants and bulbs. Years of hard work just disappeared. And there was a famous poem by a Frenchman, and he said that in the depths of winter there lies in me an invincible summer. That really helped me through that flooding period. Since the flood and our replanting, the area I'm most proud of is the main mixed borders that run through the middle of the garden and frame the view up to the house. The flood has forced us to reinvent and redesign those borders, and I'm very pleased with the outcome. So this is classic Lutyens. Beautiful red brick path here, really deep, rich borders, full of a massive range of plants, typical of the period. We have a fantastic dahlia here, same colour as the canna behind it, but very different flower forms, working really well together. Dahlias are a plant that I'm enormously fascinated and in love with. They are incorporated into every part of the planting arrangements through the borders in the gardens here. My biggest bit of advice for any gardener is perseverance, because no matter how bad things seem, nature is an incredibly resilient and surprising creature.
It's great to see the Salutation looking so good after my last visit. And I do know that however disastrous a flood might seem, it's amazing the way that it recovers. And within a few months, everything is blooming. Now, you may have noticed that there's an extra dog. 2 Nigels, or at least a Nigel and a half. This is Nellie, who is very keen on the biscuit I've got in my hand. There you go now. There you are, Nigel. We'll be seeing a little bit of her, but she's completely naughty, unlike Nigel. So, to a certain extent, you're a bit of a wild card, aren't you, Nell? Come on. This area is the copse. It used to just be grass, and it's just beginning to come into life. The primroses are coming through to their best. So really what I'm trying to do in the garden is mimic a little piece of woodland, which you can do on any scale. I bought a job load of trees at a tree sale by accident, really. I fell into it, spent much more money than I planned, and ended up with a whole batch of trees to plant. And that was great, because it gave me structure. But of course, all these trees were small enough to carry in one hand and fit in the boot of a car. And even things like this cherry, this is the wild cherry, or Jian as it's known, started out really small, and it's great to see them grow, to be in a garden long enough to see them develop into full-size trees. Although I would say that the wild cherry is not perhaps the ideal tree if you've got a small garden, because they do have a habit of sucking up all the moisture and all the goodness from the ground. You can see there are hardly any primroses. So I'd look for a better tree for smaller gardens. But you will find it. There are lots and lots of trees. And even an oak tree, be gentle with that, can work. This is an oak, Quercus robur, and it's a complete mistake to think that you can't plant an enormous oak or beech because you won't live to see it grow. Every stage of its growth, from a tiny little sapling to a monstrous 100 or 300-year-old tree, is fascinating. There is a tree out there for your garden, however big or small it might be. And Joe has been to a tree nursery to have a look at the selection.
I believe that every garden should have at least one tree. But the range and variety of these marvellous plants is dazzling. So, how do you know which one to pick? This tree nursery in Worcester is one of the largest in the country, and Nick Dunn is on hand to guide me through the choices.
Hello, Nick.
Good to see you.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Wow, what a fantastic nursery. You've got some amazing trees here. Say you know you want some trees in your garden. What are the first considerations to think about?
Well, overall space. Where can you allocate a tree to? Most trees that we grow for gardens specifically are small. They're not that vigorous. They can be pruned.
There's a tree for every garden.
There's a tree for every garden and every space.
Can I help? Should we get a little thing going here?
Lovely, thank you, Joe.
But what about soil conditions?
Most of our trees that we grow specifically for gardens can tolerate a very wide range of soil conditions, from somewhat acid to quite alkaline.
Now, the average size garden is about 14 metres by 14 metres. So, not enormous, but you can get a few trees in there. But in a way, they've got to work really, really hard to earn their space. So what would you be looking for?
If you can get 2 or 3 seasons performance within that tree, flower, fruit, autumn colour on the leaf, perhaps even bark, you'd be doing well, wouldn't you? And there are some trees that will function like that. And
so what sort of things?
Choice.
This crab apple or something?
Well, if you look at these crab apples, I mean, just the crab apple itself comes in various sizes, colours, persistency. Some will mature early for making crab apple jelly. Others will feed birds late into the winter. And this is just one tree.
And the flowers in spring are beautiful as well.
Oh, fabulous.
From flowers to foliage, trees have so much to offer, and perhaps one of their best attributes is spectacular leaf colour that can change with the seasons.
And it's mid-September now, and the autumn hues are starting to come through, aren't they? Those fabulous colours that we expect. This is a nice one. What's that, euonymus, is it?
It is. It's euonymus red cascade. It's got good fruit colour and a very interesting corky bark as well, so it's a multi-featured tree.
What about silver birches? They're very popular, aren't they?
They are. These Jacomontii utilis forms turn white very quickly.
Yeah, and then, I mean, all winter, that bark in the garden, I mean, incredibly sculptural as a tree, really beautiful, and a nice, delicate, light canopy over the top.
It's a great feature tree. It's very dynamic. Winter needs cheering up, and it will always give you that fresh look outside the window.
And if your garden is truly tiny, there's still a tree for you.
We've got here a patio range of trees of all sorts of ornamentals, and this is a great example of what you can do in pots. In 20 years' time, it may get up to about a metre, but it just shows you the variety of shapes and sizes and growth rates that we've got, provided you look after them.
OK, so because in a container, every plant needs to be watered and fed as well, more than in the ground.
Exactly. People will often ask, well, do I pot them on? When do I put them into a bigger pot?
Yeah.
And our suggestion would be every 2 years. If it's growing and extending growth, it's happy. If it stopped growing, it still may flower and leaf up and so on, but it won't be truly happy. So you've got to encourage a bit of extension growth every year.
There's a huge variety of trees to choose from out there. Do a little research, make your choice, get excited about it, and I'm sure your tree will reward you for many years to come.
Well, next week, Joe is going to be looking at how to plant trees so that they thrive and grow as well as possible. Come on, you. Come on. At this time of year, this is one of the most dramatic plants in the garden. In fact, it's really not much more than a bramble, but it is one of the loveliest brambles that you can grow. It's called Rubus coburnianus. And as well as this beautiful arching form with these plum colours shining through, it's covered with a kind of milky, dusty coating that makes it look ghostly as the light falls and forms this beautiful arching shapes. Now, that's the good side of it, and it is lovely. The bad side of it is it's incredibly prickly and very invasive, because wherever it touches the ground, it layers itself and throws up new shoots. And if you're not careful, it would easily take over. So as the new leaves appear, which will be sort of end of March time, I'm going to cut this right back down to the ground, and then you get new shoots, and in time they'll get too big and they'll have to be cut back. Now, it's not time to cut that yet, but here are some jobs you can do this weekend. Autumn fruiting raspberries should be cut down to the ground now, if you haven't done so already. They produce their fruit on new growth, which will start to appear in the next few weeks. They differ from summer fruiting ones in that they don't start to make any fruit at all until the middle to end of summer, round about August. So if your raspberries produce fruit in June or early July, don't prune them now, because they will be the summer variety. Although most clematis have put on a huge amount of growth already this year, if they are the late flowering types like Clematis Visicella and flower from July onwards, they should still be cut back hard. Reduce them to about a foot of growth or a couple of buds, and this will stimulate fresh shoots that will carry this year's flowers. It's a good idea to sow chilies as soon as possible if you've got somewhere warm for them to germinate. Fill a seed tray with a peat-free compost and sprinkle the seeds thinly onto it. Cover them over and water them, and put them somewhere warm to germinate, at least 20 degrees. They may take a few weeks to appear, but they do need a nice long time to establish good plants. Come on. Poor Nigel now. Poor Nigel. He's poor boy. Don't bully him. Come on, Nigel. Right. The light's coming in. It's getting a little bit chilly. That's the end of this week's programme. But don't forget, on Sunday, it's Mothering Sunday. I remember when I was young, I used to go and pick primroses for my mother, because I always associate primroses with this time of year. And the days are getting longer, and the weather will get warmer. And I'll see you back here next week. Till then, bye-bye. Come on, Nellie, you naughty girl. Come on, go. Come on. And don't forget, I'll be back on Big Dreams, Small Spaces this coming Thursday at 7 o'clock on BBC Two.